was inspired by your comments about, I think, what you called the third space. Can you kind of describe the importance of associations in that third space?
Yeah, absolutely. The first space is family or home. The second space is work, but the third space is that place where we find our peers, where we find our non-family family, if you will. It's the place where community is built. Um, the in the context of professional associations, we usually think of professional associations as being places for professional development or places to show off how important we are. Actually, in my experience, professional associations are places where you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to justify the importance of your work. You don't have to, you are among people who automatically know what it is that you do, and you don't have to explain everything. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was at a meeting of an advisory committee on which I served. It was for the arts administration program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I arrived late and sat down next to my dear friend Jody Besnoska. And Jody was at the time the marketing director for the Walton Arts Center in Arkansas. She leaned over and said, "I was concerned that you were late. You're never late. Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I had a board meeting today and I had to explain to the board why it was that our current ticket sales were not matching our projections." And she responded, "Oh, the fall meeting." And it's that kind of automatic understanding that I'm talking about when I say that the professional associations are crucial for our, not only for our professional development, but for our personal development. They're where we find a non-family family. They're where we find friends. They're where we find people among whom we don't have to justify our existence.
That's a great explanation. And I like to think of this podcast. I hope that it becomes somewhat of that third space where when I was reflecting on what I want this to be, it's building a community where you can come and complain, explain, explore, and uplift one another,
Right.
and understand one another. And so you just made a great comment that in telling that story, which goes into some other questions that I'm excited to explore with you, which is that fall season phenomenon. And I would imagine that conversation was years ago, but it sounds like a conversation that I just had with a friend who runs a professional theater near me, who's having those same conversations. What can you describe that phenomenon in performing arts in particular?
In the performing arts in particular, actually, I picked up a phrase years ago when I was a volunteer on a church board, and the phrase is faith budget. In a church context, it's the Lord will provide. But in the context of performing arts, we are constantly working with faith budgets. We project the number of people that we expect to purchase tickets during the course of a year whose details we do not understand. This year in particular, there is a phenomenon that will have an impact on ticket sales across the performing arts industry that we know exists, but that we cannot estimate with any degree of accuracy, and that is the impact that the election will have, the impact that the lead up, the presidential campaigns will have, because people get their entertainment from watching the horse race, watching the political horse race, and they become obsessed with that horse race. And that distracts them from other things that they would normally do with their leisure time. For example, attend performances. So every 4 years in the United States, we always have some kind of impact from a presidential election campaign on attendance at performing arts events. But when we do our booking or programming, we seldom take that into account, and only later say, "Oh yeah, the reason people aren't buying as many tickets as they usually do is because of the president."
So you just gave me another point that I can advocate on why we should increase public funding for the arts, that I'm going to blame those politicians for taking away from our ticket sales. Therefore, they owe
they
it.
owe
They
that
owe it to
money.
us. They owe us at least every 4 years to make up for that difference. So thank you. I will remind them of that the next time I have a conversation.
That's
But you're
exactly
right. You're right. It seems like we go into this amnesia
right.
of repeated behavior, which then brings to mind another thing we talked about was audience development and the aging of the audience. We've been talking about that for 50 years, haven't we?
Oh, more than that, easily. I want to go back though to the notion of amnesia. We do regularly explain why it is that things don't happen, or why it is that things happen out of sequence. The fact is that people are bad predictors of their own behavior. I'll give you an example of that. Years ago, I was involved not only in the arts but in managing the sports facilities at Arizona State University. And there was and the NFL Cardinals had committed to move from St. Louis to Arizona. The Arizona Republic, the major newspaper in the area, did a survey of its readership saying, how many of you are going to want season tickets for the NFL team when it comes to the Phoenix area? And what they got was a result based upon good polling practices, a result that indicated that there would be 150,000 season ticket holders, or 150,000 people who would want season tickets. And there were only 75,000 seats in the stadium, so that meant that only half the people were going to be able to get season tickets. Now, what actually happened was that 30,000 people bought season tickets for the first season of the Cardinals. What happened? Well, what happened was that the survey did not say, if you send $1,500 to this address by this date. The practicalities were not done. So people said, yeah, I'll buy season tickets. And then they say, oh, that's going to cost a lot of money at once, a long time in advance. I don't get to, and then I don't get my money back if I don't go to the game. This was before the era of being able to resell your tickets online. So people are bad predictors of their own behavior because we don't take into account the practicalities. We don't take into account the fact that Uncle Jerry is going to choose that day to come from Alaska to visit you.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I explained, especially during the pandemic, to lawmakers, which is, the shelf life of our products
Yes.
are very short. Unlike an iPhone or, an automobile tire or something that if, oh, well, it rained today or we had a blizzard, and so we'll just go back tomorrow, and the shelf life's there. We either hit our mark or we don't
at that moment,
at that moment,
or we don't. That's
or we
exactly.
don't. And it's similar to sporting events,
Very,
but although
except
we
there
can
are
talk,
in baseball, and
correct,
football doesn't. Football doesn't not happen if it rains.
correct, right. So how do we adjust for that? Or is it just the nature of our business?
Well, the ephemeral nature of the product is is part of the nature of the product. It's part of the reason why the product is valuable, is that it is an occasion that will never occur again. And part of that occasion, of course, is the participation of the audience in the experience itself. Not only the experience, it's not just performers doing something in a vacuum, it's performers responding to the response of the audience. It's a feedback loop, and both parties are affected by it, and therefore, not only is the experience ephemeral, the experience is unique, never to be repeated. No matter what the circumstance.
And that's interesting idea to use as a marketing tactic, perhaps. So, are you familiar with the phrase FOMO?
Yes, I am. Fear of
Okay.
missing out, precisely.
Yes. Yes. So, how do we go from no show to FOMO?
Exactly. And actually, that is part of the reason why people build a habit to attend the performing arts, is because they have experienced something that is valuable to them and they don't want to miss the next opportunity to experience something similar. But and that's the FOMO is the underlying aspect of all effective performance marketing, I believe. But we don't yet quite know how to make it. I'm not specific is not the word I'm looking for, but how to articulate it clearly. Because when we try to say you're going to miss it, we haven't yet told them why it's important, especially for new people. Which brings us back to your question of earlier about audience development and the graying of the audience. I got my first paycheck from a performing arts center in the winter of 1968. I was a student employee.
What, like a third grade student employee?
I was a college freshman. But and then I worked at the Performing Arts Center for 4 years, and my undergraduate degree in drama was responsible for some of the work that I did. But what I became, let me stop at that point. I learned many things, but with regard to the graying of the audience, in right about that time, right about the end of the 60s, a paper was written which talked about the crisis specifically of symphony orchestras. As my friend Carol Stouffer says, when you stand at the back of the auditorium, all you see are Q-tips. That is, it's a room full of gray heads. But gray heads are a renewable resource. And over the last half century or more, that's been entirely proven. Since that paper was written in 1968, we are still complaining. We are still worrying. We are still concerned about the fact that our audience seats are filled with Q-tips. But the fact is that they're not the same people they were before. The audience does die out, but there is always another phalanx of gray heads to replace them. Why is there another phalanx of gray heads to replace them? Because we've been doing audience development over the years. Because in general, we as an industry, the performing arts industry, are measuring the effectiveness of our audience development efforts on too short a timeline. And we are therefore cutting short effective audience development programming.
Go into that a little bit.
Well, next year, if we attract a 35-year-old attorney who is in the process of building a career, who is in the process of raising a family. If we attract that person to a performance and that person is enchanted by the experience, that person will not turn around and purchase season tickets for the next 30 years. That person is busy building a career, raising a family, taking one child to dance and one child to soccer for another 10 years. Because that person was enchanted, she's likely to come back in 15 years when the kids have moved out of the house.
Oh, so that's there's something there, which is don't expect a one-time or first-time attendee to then become the season holder or subscriber.
Right.
But it's cultivate those one-time attendees while you're also cultivating or continuing to have that subscriber base. So there's a two-pronged approach.
Exactly.
It's not right. And there are two different audiences. And I could argue perhaps there's three different audiences, right? Like and it's just, and who do we want to reach at that particular moment?
And, the answer, the emotional answer for everybody who's running an arts organization is we want everybody. We want everybody.
Right. Right.
But the fact is that the folks who are most likely to come most often are the folks who have disposable time and disposable income. And those folks are older.
Mm-hmm. So the notion of naysayers who are arts for art's sake, mm-hmm. and who think that it's a crime, I'm exaggerating, that we would have the symphony play for the Harry Potter movie, or my 15-year-old daughter attended the Pittsburgh Symphony this summer to see one of her favorite 25-year-old artists, Leve, perform. And at first she was like, whoa, wait a minute. Nope, this is not what I was expecting. Nobody's going to look like me. They're all going to be old. She's not going to sing the songs that I know, etc. We ended up going, and halfway through the performance, my 15-year-old leans over to me and said, Mom, I just got the chills because that music is wow. And so I sat there smiling and thought, accomplishment, well done, job well done. You did it. Because are we going to go back next week? No. But the next time I suggest we go listen to an orchestra, she's not going to walls down. No, I'm not going to go there. There's that option. The door was open for that.
Exactly. And we need to understand that that's a long-term investment. It's
right.
not going to be back next week, but when she has the option of going to events herself from the ages of 18 to 25, she will do that. I'm going to be an old person for a moment.
Just for a moment.
Thank you very much. And I'm going back to a time in which two-parent families were believed to be the norm. I recognize that is no longer the case, but there is still a significant element of that in the United States. That there are two-parent families, there are couples who get together and decide together what it is that they are going to do. But there is a time period. There are two time periods in the maturity of a person where they have the ability to follow their own tastes with regard to spending their free time. One of those time periods is from the ages of 18 to 22 or 25. One of those time periods is 45 to 55 and older. Because in between those time periods, you're connected to other people. You're building a career, and you are connected to other folks, either in a formal family relationship or in some kind of a partnership relationship. And so your activities are a compromise between your taste and the taste of the other person who's in the partnership, or the needs of the other people who are in the partnership, so that your daughter will be free to experiment again with symphony between the ages of 18 and 25. Then chances are that she will become engaged with other people for a period of time. And when she is older and has more disposable income and more disposable time, she may yet return to a symphony situation, may yet return to she may remember that enchantment. There's another thing with regard to your example that I think is important. I tell my students that they think they are the coolest folks in the world. And right now they are absolutely right. They are the coolest folks in the world. However, your taste in popular music will be the same when you are 70 as it was when you are 20. That is the reason why when I came up in the industry in the 1970s, the big question was, should performing arts centers book ghost bands? Glenn Miller Orchestra, the Duke Ellington Orchestra, should they book big bands? The question now is, the corresponding question now is, should they book tribute acts? Should they book tributes to rock and roll bands that are no longer operating? And the answer in both cases is yes, because that's the gateway to the arts.
It's another daughter story. So she, a few years ago, wanted to start collecting albums at 13. And it was that, and my husband and I thought albums are a thing again. And he actually was worried about, and said this to the record store owner, independent record store owner, boy, I hope she doesn't ever stop liking this artist when she gets older, because she's spending a lot of money now. And the owner said, actually, it's the artist that you like when you were a teen, when you were in that age, you will never not like. It's the artists, though, perhaps mid-life may come in and out.
Exactly.
But it's exactly what you just said. There's like that nostalgia forming now that we know. Correct. And so that's really interesting that you phrase that.
We're back to the third space again, in a sense, because
right.
The music that you love growing up becomes a third space for you. It reminds you of the connections that you made when you were young, when you didn't have to work, when you were anxious to be out of the home. It becomes a psychological third space for you. That there are certainly people whose taste evolves with time, but for the most part, those of us who programmed performances needed to come to the realization that that the music of the people we are trying to attract and who are most likely to buy our tickets is 35 to 40 years old, 35 to 40 years out of date.
Yep. Yeah. So along these lines, but shifting a little bit into how we measure art's impact. I had a meeting last week with a client who was talking to me about the National Theatre of London, and he's going there in a month to do some work, and described to me a program that they had where they went to the government and said, we need more funding because we're losing cultivating younger audience. And there are audience now in the UK that don't even know who Shakespeare is. And so was able to get funding to provide free entrance, free admission for those, let's say 25 and under. All of my facts aren't there, but you get the gist.
Right, I get the gist.
So that program happened. They then surveyed that audience and said, of any choice that you have, how likely are you to come back to the theater? And 25% said that they would rather go back to the theater than attend a sporting event or another live performing thing. They were trying to figure out why that is. And so the debate's been, well, because it's free, so we need to always have it free. I said, well, I know from working with organizations through the pandemic, and they came out, and we had a myriad of organizations trying buy one, get one, pay what you can, $10. I said, or they would do a $120 experience package. And then we fast forward, and we now talk about the Taylor Swift factor, right? I'm sure you've talked about that too. So if you want to go, chances are that age will find a way to get there. So
Yes.
I said, well, rather than think about pricing, what was it about that experience that that patron received that makes them want to go back? And can we measure what that is? Was it a sense of community? Was there did it decrease anxiety? Did it calm them for a time? So I'm really interested in what is that wow factor that the arts provides to both participant and patron that makes us want to go back. And that's what we should be advertising or promoting, to say those that engage experience X.
Yes. I don't have the answer to what it is, but we both know that it exists. And it's in part the uniqueness of the experience. It's certainly in part the fact that there's that feedback loop that I talked about at the beginning, that the artist is impacted by the reaction of the audience, and that impact on the artist in turn energizes the audience. That feedback loop is pretty marvelous.
Yeah, I've spent probably the last decade really trying to understand art's impact, the true public value. There was a study done 20 years ago that was funded by the Wallace Foundation and in partnership with Harvard about how are we measuring impact. And this study classified or said, for 30 years, we've been measuring a transaction as the impact. How big are your audience? How big's your budget? How many artists do you employ or work with?
Right.
And 20 years ago said we actually need to shift and start measuring transformation.
Mm-hmm.
So not how many necessarily, but what happens to those that do participate. So exactly. I've been on this mission for a long time to figure out how do you measure that? And I'm interested in measuring empathy and kindness and all of these benefits that we know and that we talk about all the time that the arts give, help recovery, lower recidivism rates, aging population, all of those things. But if we can measure in real time and use data along with the story as proof of the public value, that we can quantitatively measure art's impact, perhaps does that begin that what I call the movement of the Renaissance of relevance to increase resources and revenue.
Fully agree with you. And as a matter of fact, I'd love to talk with you about connecting with the work you're going to do.
If we look at now the arts and create an assessment measuring tool along with this software, so think of a CRM. So I say, just as an arts organization wouldn't imagine not having a customer relationship management tool to track donors and funders and subscribers, I believe in order to best communicate art's impact, we will get to a point where we will never operate without what I'm calling is a customer impact management system that manages or measures outcomes and true public value, that we show what we know is that the arts are foundational to all industries and society.
Mm-hmm. I fully agree. On the first day of class, when I talk to my undergraduate arts management students, I say, in order to define arts management, we have to define art. And for our purposes in this classroom, art is not an object or an occasion. Art is what happens when an audience member and a work of art encounter one another and the audience member suddenly finds that they're seeing the world through somebody else's eyes. It's that moment of empathy. It is, in my mind, the reason the arts are found fundamentally important to the future of the human race. Most of the problems in our world today can be traced to the fact that some people don't understand how other people see the world. Some people don't understand how other people experience the world. And the only thing that is going to overcome that lack of understanding is empathy. And the arts are the empathy business.
Yes. And last time we spoke, I was going over my notes and I wrote this down, and I'm not sure if it's something that you said or something that I thought of. So but it's brilliant, I think. It says we need to stop defending the arts and start defining the arts.
Very good, Pat.
I think that it's true. The arts, I have a lot of sayings. The arts need to come out the arts closet. It's not arts for art's sake. It's arts for outcomes. And what I also say is
for the world's sake, folks.
yes. And then what I like to say too, along your lines is, it's art isn't an object. It's a mindset.
Yes. I fully agree. The Renaissance scholar, former president of Yale, and late commissioner of baseball, A. Bartlett Giamatti, wrote a book called Take Time for Paradise. And his father was an actor. His son, Paul Giamatti, is one of our finest actors. Mm-hmm. And he talked precisely about that wow factor, that feedback loop in both sports and the arts. So it's worth taking a look at Bart Giamatti's book, Take Time for Paradise. Very, very short book. I also have a reference for you about the third place, if you would.
Oh, yes.
Reference as well.
Yes.
It's called Finding Your Third Place: Building Happier Communities and Making Friends Along the Way. And it's written by Richard Kyte, Kyte.
I'll list all of that below. I love your book recommendations. Thank you. This is usually the time where I like to end the conversation with two standard questions to every person that I have the privilege of speaking with. Jim, how do you define art?
I define art as that moment when the audience member finds that they're looking through somebody else's eyes. That's the Marcel Proust definition, and I don't think it can be improved upon. It is that moment of revelation, that moment of empathy. And it can be a laugh, it can be a sigh, it can be a tear, or it can be a life entirely changed.
What color do you love most and why?
I love medium blue. You may be able to tell that. And I love medium blue because it's the color of the ocean. It's the color of the sky. And there's a depth and a comfort to it.
Jim, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. Thank you. And I look forward to another conversation. It's been really great.
As do I. It's been terrific, Angie.